Working with electricity is dangerous. This video is an example of what we've done. Read the disclaimer carefully before you continue. Okay, so before we start with the physical videos showing you how to do a photovoltaic solar electricity system, I just quickly want to give you some theoretical background. When I started looking at installing my own PV system, I just could not find information that helped me really to understand how the system works. I could find lots of videos showing me how to do an installation, but the why was missing. So before we begin, let me quickly show you what a basic PV solar system looks like, and then we'll progress from there. I'll show you how it was changed eventually to the system that I've installed. So a basic system comprises of 4 components: your PV panel or your solar panel, a charge controller, a sort of a regulator that takes the electricity that comes from the PV panel and regulate it down to a normal voltage that you can use to charge your battery. Just bear in mind, the PV panel, if it's dark, there's no output. If there's lots of lights, there's a fairly high voltage output. So a 12 volt system, most probably you'll use a 28 to 36 volt panel charging a 12 volt battery. So obviously that voltage needs to be regulated down to the correct charge voltage for the battery. So that's the job of a charge controller. Now you get different types of charge controllers. The cheapest ones on the market at the moment is what we call a pulse width modulation charger. I'm not going into the detail of how it actually converts the higher voltage to the lower voltage, but the name sort of gives you an indication of the technology involved. Then obviously you need a battery, and on a very basic installation, the charge controller will have a PV in connection, it will have a battery out connection, and it will also have a connection for load. Now, a typical medium-sized solar panel will give you about 8 to 10 amps worth of current. So if you actually think about the charge controller, then takes that, or the higher voltage and current, and converts it into a charge current and at the correct voltage for the battery. The load part is, let's call it a protection circuit that's built into the charge controller to achieve 2 things. Number one, to make sure that if there's a load that exceeds the capability of that charge controller, most probably 10 amps or something like that, it will cut that load off. Okay, so it will make sure that you don't overstress your system. But secondly, also, once the battery voltage gets too low, it will also cut it off, because it's really bad for batteries to be discharged too much. It actually hurts the battery. The problem with that is the current that's available in a system like that is equal to the rating of the charge controller. So in this scenario, if we had a 28 or a 30 volt panel with a 10 amp charge controller and a 12 volt battery, it means that we can do just using basic calculations, we can draw 120 watts from the system. Now 120 watts is not a lot, so very quickly the charge controller will basically switch the load off to protect itself and the battery. So not very practical. Now one of the things that we can do in terms of this is obviously we can then bypass the load and actually pull the load directly from the battery. So the solar panel can, via the charge controller, charge the battery until the battery is full, and then we can pull directly from the battery. And the bigger your battery, the more current you can actually draw from that battery, so you can put quite a load on that battery. Problem is there's no more protection, so there's no overload protection, and the chances are that you're also going to drain the battery below an acceptable voltage. Now, what that acceptable voltage is dependent on the type of batteries that you use. If you use lead acid batteries or lead calcium batteries like I do, it's most probably you don't want to go below 1 volt for a 12 volt battery. So theoretically about 2 volt on a 24 volt system, but even that is most probably stressing it. The deeper you discharge in your batteries, the shorter the period of time they will last. So if you take a 12 volt system and you drain it to 11 volt before you switch it off, most probably if it is lead calcium, you will get about 2 years, maybe 3 years out of that battery. Not a very long time. If you actually drain it less, you can easily double the lifespan of the battery. Okay, so let's go to the next step then. What if one battery in one panel is not enough? Well, then obviously you need multiple panels and you need multiple batteries. So well, this is very similar to what I've done. I've got multiple panels on the top of my roof. Each one of these panels running into a charge controller, each one of them giving me about 10 amps worth of charge current, and I've connected them in parallel to charge batteries, which is also in parallel. And as you'll see on this illustration, my system is a 24 volt system, so there's 2 batteries in series and another 2 batteries in series, and the rack is built so that I can put another 2 batteries in series also on. Now you'll also see that the description of the charge controller has changed. It's no longer a pulse width modulation charger. It's an MPPT charge controller. It's basically just a very smart charge controller that changes the way that it charges the battery depending on what the voltage and the absorption of current of the battery or the battery bank is at that specific moment in time. You'll most probably see if you go to your hardware shop, the new motor vehicle battery charger is a small little device, and that basically operates exactly the same principle. So it will pulse the battery at different frequencies with different voltage levels depending on the charge state of the battery. So very effective way of charging batteries. The other nice thing about MPPT controllers is you can actually put them in parallel without them fighting with each other. With a pulse width modulation charge controllers, you tend to get a fair bit of loss if you actually put them in parallel. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So the next addition that I've done is I've connected a switch so that I can disconnect each one of my PV panels. If there's a short on that PV panel, I can basically disconnect it from the system and make sure that there's not a short over my battery. Short over your battery will cause the batteries to get hot. Once the batteries get hot, they can actually explode or catch fire. So really not something that you want to happen. The other thing that I've done is I've also put a switch in line from my charge controllers, so I can actually disconnect all of the charge controllers from the battery bank if I want to. And what I've also done is connected a double pole switch between my inverter and my battery, so I can completely isolate my inverter from my battery bank. Next bit that's been added is more about safety. So I've added two surge protectors, the one on the input side of the batteries and the other one on the output side of the batteries. You'll see a little bit later that actually all of these components, the switch and the surge controller and the fault circuit and the switches that's from the PV panels, is in one breaker box, and then the components on the, let's call it the output side of the battery, the fuse, the double pole switch or the isolator switch, the surge protector, is all in another little breaker box. Now on the output side, I've also added a fuse to make sure that once the maximum current that the inverter can basically handle is reached, the fuse will blow to protect to protect the inverter, to make sure that that's not overloaded. Another interesting little feature here, you'll see that there's a little arrow that runs to the switch, a little block that says fault, and I'll explain a little bit later. I've actually built a little circuit where I detect if there is a leak current between the positive leads on any one of the PV panels and earth. So it's a earth protector for the panel side, earth leakage protector for the panel side. So at the moment that happens, it also switches off the all of the PV input into the batteries and make sure that I don't get a short across my battery poles. The last little component that I've added is a battery protector. You can remember when I started talking about all of this stuff, I said that you don't want to discharge your batteries too deeply. The charge protector that I've basically, or the battery protector that I'm using here, is a automotive device made for trucks. So it's a 24 volt battery cut-off switch that can operate at 120 amps. So quite heavy current. But the moment my 24 volt batteries drops to about 23 volts, the battery protector will basically switch off the input into the inverter, making sure that I don't discharge the batteries too deeply and hurt them. So by putting that little device in, I've most probably doubled the life of my batteries. So that's basically as far as the theoretical bit goes. There is a diagram for download available that shows you exactly what the circuit will look like, with all the detail of the fault protection and all those type of things. So what remains to be done now is we just need to go and physically show you how everything is built.